Okay, so now we're going to continue with our Gem Education Day, and it's my pleasure to introduce Eric BRAUNWART of Columbia Gem House. Eric has a special presentation. It's a new slice of the entire gem market that he's been observing and working hard at for quite some time, and he wants to share it with us. We're excited to hear it, and here's Eric BRAUNWART. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you to Howard and Centurion. It's great to have a chance to speak here. And I would love to say I had a great PowerPoint like Edward just did, but he's a little more organized than I am, afraid. And so when I heard it was audio here, I thought, well, I get to pass on the PowerPoint and I'll just talk for a while. The PowerPoints help me, though, because it keeps me sort of on point. Now it's my little white cheat sheet here, so if I flash that around, it's to keep me out of the weeds and try and keep on subject. So anyway, my name's Eric BRAUNWART. I'm with Columbia Gem House. We started 45 years ago, so we started in what I refer to now as, well, I'd say it, the old jewelry industry. Maybe I should say the traditional jewelry industry, but I call it the old industry and the new industry. And they're like two separate markets. It's the younger people that we're working with, it's a whole different world there. So we work just in colored stones. We don't work in diamond. We work from working with mines in a number of countries. Here's my little cheat sheet. Mexico, Vietnam, Australia, Malawi, Liberia, Nigeria, and then a lot of U.S. mines. There's quite a bit of U.S. production, so we did a lot of work there now also. So when people say, what do you want to talk about in color? I'm more talking now about how color or gemstones are brought to market and presented to the new industry. It's a new narrative, a new way of looking at gemstones. They have to be beautiful, although some of them, to me, that I sell today are maybe not as beautiful as I would think, but that's thinking from the old industry. One of the things that, I just jotted down some notes as to say, how do I define these old industry versus new industry? Old industry, refined, beautiful. New industry, authentic. If you're not authentic, your presentation, your gemstones, your whole concept, many of the buyers under 30 are not going to listen to you. High-end versus personal. Jewelry always, in many ways, was looked at as a very luxury product. The younger buyers are looking at it as a very personal product. I would say, I would challenge most of you to find a person under 30 that has not spent more on tattoos than they have on jewelry. Tattoos are very personal. It's a personal expression. We need to make jewelry that personal expression also, because without that, those younger buyers are going to grow up not as jewelry buyers. And we really need to encourage them to be jewelry buyers. Price versus story. The people we sell to come to us because of the way we bring gemstones to the market. They don't come to us for a certain gemstone. They come to us for the style, the method that we bring gems to the market. So price is secondary. It's very hard to believe that when maybe we sold to QVC and some huge people over the last 40 years. Now price is, if you don't, in our case, the people that come to us, they're not talking price. They're talking, tell us what we can convey to our current buyers, younger buyers, that want to know very personally what this means to you, what it meant to the people who produced it, what it means to me. So price then comes up, but if they can afford it, then they buy it. If they can't afford it, then maybe they look at something else. But they don't start with price, ever. For a lot of you out there, this is a difficult one, but brick and mortar versus social media. And the two age groups, those that grew up with iPhones that didn't come out until 2006. So the people that grew up with iPhones look at the way they buy jewelry, the way they research jewelry completely differently. So they are actually very active on social media, and even I am now, which is really difficult for an old guy like me. But how do you convey what you've always done as brick and mortar retailers? How do you bring social media into your marketing of colored gemstones? And that's critical, and you can do it. And a lot of people think, oh, everybody's going to just social media. That's not true. Almost all of them that we sell to, that started solely as social media, now have opened some sort of flagship store, because the social media almost makes them a rock star. And so when people are in town, they want to see where this rock star works out of. So it may be a studio, it may be a shop, it may be a full-blown jewelry store. So, but it really is what's drawing people from a very wide audience. So it's really critically important now. So when we look at this, we say, again, what are those elements? And I'll get to colored stones, but I figure I sort of came to this position when I did a World Bank project on gemstones for the poverty alleviation in Madagascar 20 years ago. And so it forced me to look at colored stones, look at the way they're marketed, look at the way they're brought to market differently, which was actually quite an eye-opener. It was very interesting. But when we did that, we came back and actually changed the way we did our business. We wrote what we call our responsible source and fair trade protocols. And that is a set of rules that every time we're looking at a new supplier, a new buyer, when we're doing cutting, it has to meet the set of what we call traceable, responsible production in the gem industry. And that doesn't mean that other people are not responsible. It's just in our case, we have the documentation all the way along to show a buyer if they want to. Now, some of them don't care. Some of the new buyers want to hear it, but they don't need all the detail, and others want to see all the detail. So in our case, that's really what we do, is provide that detail that adds to the colored stones. So again, some of those elements that we see constantly is authentic versus corporate. Don't do a corporate presentation now. It better be personal. You better be speaking to those buyers personally. Tell them about your stories. You know, it's hard for me to talk about myself, but now on the blogs, I write about how I got into color. I tied fishing flies when I was 8 years old, and that's the way I made my money. And what were they? They were these very colorful little things. You tell those stories, and you will get more response than just talking about, you know, a beautiful new garnet you bought. You really need to tell them why it excites you and how it excites you. But again, story versus standard. We're showing at 3 shows here at Tucson this year for 3 different reasons. One is the Pueblo, and that is more to service our, I'm going to call it the yoga market. It's a very different market. They generally won't be coming to AGTA. Then we're doing a show called the Ethical Gem Show Tucson. That's a very different market. Those people are crazy in support of how stones are produced and do they benefit everybody along the supply chain. And then AGTA, which is our anchor market, and we've been there since it started. Matter of fact, I think Edward and I were a couple of them that started AGTA, so we've been around for a while. And that's another market. That is more our People come to us there, again, because how we produce gemstones, but it may be more the manufacturers or some of the bigger users there. But just to throw in to show you how wide the market is today, we're selling to small designers, say in Holland, that are completely focused on how their metals are produced, how their gemstones are produced, and that is their entire market. All the way to cosmetics companies and perfume companies. We're doing a project with the third largest cosmetics company in the world now on gemstones. And you go, how is that possible? They are very much, they see this market asking for a very personal sort of product and a very emotionally rewarding product. And in this case, they feel the healing values of gemstones is what they will be marketing this materials under. So colored stones market has really expanded dramatically. So when we talk about what kind of stones, yes, that has, Edward touched on that with a whole variety of new color. And so that element has expanded dramatically. But it's also expanded in the emotional end and the emotional support end. People don't only buy jewelry now because it's a status symbol or a symbol of wealth. They're buying it because it makes them feel emotionally better. And so we need to talk to that emotional element of today's buyers. And that's hard for some of us who grew up in the traditional industry. But it's very, very critical right now. And I'll give you a story for some of the retailers out there. One of our biggest buyers right now, she started 6 years ago. She's doing somewhere between $5 and $10 million a year now. She is only web-based. And she started because she went from store to store when she was getting married, and not one store talked to her about they had no narrative for her. She wanted to understand how it helped the earth, how it helped her, how it helped her friends. And no jeweler had that narrative. So what did she do? She decided to make her own wedding ring. And she liked it so much, she started this little company. And it's exploded because that is her narrative. She really takes her narrative, her story, her beliefs to the customers. And that's really important, especially in color right now. So I just thought that was an interesting anecdote. Okay, so if you're now, and I'm going to talk about the new market now. We all grew up in the old industry, so we know beautiful gemstones and free of inclusions and the best color, that those were very important elements, right, then. The new market is very different. We intentionally cut 1/3 of all of our sapphires with inclusions in them. We specifically leave them in there because 1/3 of our demand now is for sapphires with inclusions. The younger buyers want this to speak to them in a very authentic way, and they believe inclusions are just a natural part of an authentic gemstone, and they want to see them. It's so hard. Our cutters, we set up our cutting facility 35 years ago, and we worked and worked and worked with our cutters to get them trained to do really spectacular cutting and good sawing and good preforming. And so I got an email a year ago from the manager, and he goes, "Why are you cutting all this low quality? We spent the last 30 years becoming the best cutters around, and now you're asking us to cut junk." And I had to explain to him, it's not junk in today's world. We still want the same quality of cutting. We still want the same personal quality that our beliefs bring to those gemstones. It's just that demand is changing, and we have to understand that. Is it a permanent change? I don't know that. But what I know right now is it's the element that's growing exponentially quickly. Okay, so the old rules, inclusions was my example. The old rules don't necessarily apply here. Somebody mentioned, Edward talked about some different colors. Pastels are very important right now. In many cases, we will sell a pastel sapphire, and it will sell at the same price as one of the finer colors because the person wants a pastel sapphire. One of them that came in the other day, a retailer sent us an email and she said, we need this color of sapphire. And they sent us a picture of the fiance's eyes and we were supposed to match it. That's how personal this is becoming. And I will say that happens at least 5 times a week. So this is not a small change. This is a big change. And when we talk sapphire, for the retailers out there that are doing wedding sets just in diamond, 80% of all the sapphires we sell now go into wedding sets. It's huge. And I don't think 5% did 10 years ago. So it's really a big change both in the wedding market as well as the products that go into those wedding rings. I know one person absolutely, they had to have fire opal in their wedding set. And the retailer said, boy, it's not real strong, it won't hold up. And so they came up with a good solution. The couple that had to have it bought 5 matching stones so that when one stone breaks, they put another stone in. But they were all part of this wedding set. So 1 wedding set and 5 stones, 4 replacements and 1 to go in to start with. So they personally wanted that. They didn't care about the other elements. They knew it was soft. So we need, I think, to listen to this new market maybe a little closer than we have been, because to many of us, you're sort of shocked. You just go, that's just not possible. That's not going to work. But if we don't work on it, they will go find it somewhere on the web, believe me. And God knows what they're getting on the web. So they're not going to just live by their parents' and grandparents' rules on jewelry any longer. So when we talk about stories, we work very hard at the mine locations, at the cutting locations, which is critical for us because our core is gemstone cutting. And we started working on the silicosis issues 15 years ago or more on trying to help develop cutting systems and solutions to cutters that are dying from silicosis. The estimate between China and India is about 2,000 a year. If that ever got in the newspapers, it would not be a pretty story to tell. So when we started looking at how we produce gemstones, we needed to look at all the elements, not just one, not just mining, not just location, not just how it's cut. We needed to look at the entire supply chain and try and find ways to benefit that entire supply chain. That's the story we tell. That's the reason our buyers come to us today. Or at least the majority of them, about 2/3 of our buyers, that is the part they want to hear. They want beautiful gemstones, but beautiful gemstones without that commitment, corporate commitment, personal commitment, company commitment. Without that, they're going to go look somewhere else. So that's really what we based it on, but I'll just give you a couple of those stories. We cut a stone called anthill garnet, which many of you have heard of. It's a chrome pyrope. It's very red. It's the reddest garnet you're going to see. Most of the best stuff in my mind comes from the Navajo Indian Reservation. And we work with one Navajo, and he's very traditional. He speaks Navajo. He really is more a traditional person. And it turns out these garnets are very famous in Navajo culture. The way you identify an actual Navajo rattle, their ceremonial rattles, is they only have anthill garnet in them. So if you buy one at one of the hundreds of shows around here, and you cut it open and it's got sand in it, it's not an actual Navajo rattle. They all carry them, or many of them carry them in their little medicine pouches, that it really is a protector stone for them. So he treats it very differently. He goes out and rakes the desert, like big desert, rakes them with just a rake. and then waits until after it rains, and then he goes out and he does his prayers for success, he does his prayers for the earth, and then he crawls around on his hands and knees and collects a lot of garnet. And I don't know if the prayers are what work or what, but it's the most beautiful anthill we've ever seen. We're cutting stones up to 15 carats, and that's really, really rare. So we tell that story, and a lot of the people that we work with, those are the sort of stories that they want to bring to their young consumers that want it to speak to that individual very personally. It's hard because we have 7 different inventory numbers for the 7 different locations and methods of how our peridot is produced. We probably have 20 different inventory numbers for garnets that are the same. It's a lot of work, but we're seeing that without that work, our customer base would not be growing now, and our customer base at wholesale is actually exploding. It's quite amazing. Some of them are very small buyers, some have become very big buyers. And when people say, yes, but it's only cheap stuff on Etsy, I looked at one of our sellers the other day, and she was posting colored stone pieces between $58,000 and $98,000 on her website. So, and I talked to her, and 2 had sold in 24 hours. So don't think it's just cheap Etsy places. Maybe a lot of the people started there, but they're growing those businesses pretty quickly. So, and they are telling their personal story, why they got into the industry, personal story, the story of the gemstones and how they came to market, as well as saying, we really work to bring you beautiful colored gemstones. And the other interesting part is this younger market, when I talked to them to try and find out what percentage is diamond versus color, color is about 70% of their market. Diamond is about 30. So it's a huge shift in that market. So for retailers that are doing just color or just diamond, I guess if you're ready to retire, then you can keep working with your baby boomers and sell just diamonds. If you want to pass that store on to the next generation, you're going to have to get into color. And color in a different way than maybe you thought of it in the past. So, let's see. I'll move to my next back page. So what are some of the gemstones? If you're here and looking for gems, first, if you're looking to access this new younger market, and not all the younger people are buying that way, so I don't want to give that impression, but a significant percentage are. If you want to access that market, in my mind, the first thing you have to look at is companies that really believe in bringing you a very direct, full, honest story of the journey of that gemstone. And that may only be, I bought it from this cutter, and they are great cutters, and I worked with them for years. That's fine. You've told them what you know. The more you know, I think the better it is for these buyers, but you don't have to know everything about which individual miner dug it out of the ground and which individual cutter cut it. That's not practical on certain gemstone varieties. Maybe on a, 50 carat spinel it is. It's not on a lot of amethyst and garnet and citrine and morganites. But tell them what you know, be honest about it, but be very authentic about it, be very personal about it. So what gemstones do we see? Edward mentioned aqua, and aqua is growing quite well in the market right now, partly because there's better supply, partly because there's some incredible color out there, and partly because it's in this beryl family. So when you're talking to your potential client, yes, you may be talking about emerald, but morganite and aqua and heliodor fall into that same category. And we actually have a couple of manufacturers that are using color suites of beryl, goshenite, green beryl, morganite, hemp, and aqua. And the color tones look great together, they match, and it looks like Easter colors to me. But anyway, it's really a very personal expression, both of their design, and then those are all stones that we work very hard to document. Most of what we're getting in those stones now is Nigerian, and they're producing some really wonderful material there. Barrels would be one. I would definitely be looking at those if you're here at the show. Edward mentioned gray stones. Oh, we have calls every week for multiple calls. It can be a gray sapphire, it can be a gray spinel, it can be a gray tourmaline. But gray stones that we would always put in our reject pile, we didn't even cut them. And now we're cutting them. It's an important part of the market right now. American stones. For us, we cut lots of American stones, and that really has exploded for a couple of reasons. I think under today's administration, America has been pushed America has been pushed very hard on people. And whether you agree with the politics or not, that word is out there constantly. I think that's part of it. I also think a significant increase in American production is part of it. We cut a lot of Montana sapphire, and for those of you that don't know about Montana, there really are 4 significant mining areas in Montana. It's not just Montana sapphire. We cut the majority of the Yogo Gulch material that's produced today, and that is an untreated natural blue. And when people say, yeah, what does it sell for? I tell them, just go find a cashmere price list as best you can and just use that. It's really expensive, especially when you get over ½ carat. Small stones are readily available, fairly available. Above ½ carats, they get very rare. If you're at a 2 carat wholesale, you better be prepared to pay $25,000 to $40,000 a carat. They're really expensive. So what are the other 3 locations? Gem Mountain, there's significant production there. And it goes by 2 names, Gem Mountain and Rock Creek. It is the same deposit. And then you'll have Missouri River. Well, then if you want to dice that further, it's Dana Bar, American Bar, and Sapphire Bar. These are areas on the Missouri River that produce. And they generally produce bigger stones, not really as intensive colors, which was a problem years ago when pastels weren't so popular. They are now. And then the third is quite unusual. It's called Dry Cottonwood Creek, and they produce the most screaming oranges and yellows you've ever seen. Like orange, that you would just swear are beryllium diffused except that we do our own heat treatment and there's no beryllium in our ovens. So they really come out that color. So that's one reason that I think some of the American stones are getting more popular. Another one is peridot that's been actually in fashion for quite a while. We see that continuing, and now, for those of you who don't know, the majority of probably half of the world's peridot, and the majority of the American peridot comes from the San Carlos Apache Indian Reservation, just a little bit northeast of here. So they produced for many years. Again, it's something really part of their culture. It is artisanally produced there, just like so many different areas that Edward spoke about. Then there's a whole host of other stones that we see more interest in. Opaques. The U.S. produces wonderful jaspers. We see a lot of interest in chalcedonies. There's a purple chalcedony coming out of Nevada that's really fantastic. Right now, I think the best blue chalcedony in the world is coming out of Mexico, and it's incredible material. So I talked a little bit about gemstone varieties that I would look for here, but if I had to then say, okay, what goes with it? I wrote my little notes. Authentic, authentic, authentic. comma, environment, comma, beauty, story, experience, story, and price is last. You will find when you're selling these stones, if you bring this to your customers personally, price is not going to be your issue. If they fall in love with that stone because of the way you talked to it, the way you produced it, the way you personally presented it to them, if they can't afford it, then they can't afford it. If they can afford it, they're not bargaining. It's important to them. You've brought them more than just a beautiful gemstone, and to them, that's worth more money. They're not there for price. So there's plenty of places on the web if you're after the price. You can go buy a 5-carat ruby for 20 bucks a carat on the web. And I think a lot of these new buyers are starting to realize that everything on the web is not true. So you guys, you people, you jewelers are the experts. You personally love these stones. You personally love what you're doing, or you wouldn't be doing it. Tell them about that. Tell them that story as well as the story of the gemstones. And you do that and you will find a new market. Yes, you're going to have to access it on social media, which is a challenge for some of us. But you will find once you get that started, if you're telling the right story, if you're showing the right gemstones, if you're presenting your company in the right light, that very rapidly those people start sharing it with their friends, and those friends start sharing it with their friends. And some of the jewelers that we sell to now, I think one of them started 5 years ago. They started their social media about 3 years ago, and they have 450,000 people that follow them on their Instagram posts. They will sell anything they put up within about 20 minutes. It's amazing. You just can't believe it. So you really have to be active in that area. Without that, that is the outreach. If you're not, newspaper ads and billboards, great. If you're my age, you'll respond to those. If you're my kid's age, you don't respond to them. It's what's on their cell phone that they're going to respond to. So my talk is, yes, about color, because color is what I've always been in. It's what I love, and the reason I'm in it is because I like color. I happen to end up in gemstones, but I like color. And that really is part of what we have to be conveying to our customers, who then convey it to that final consumer. And the very personal aspect of color, as opposed to, in my mind, the very impersonal aspect of diamond. White's white, they're beautiful, they sparkle, and if you line 100 of them up, to most buyers, you can't tell the difference. You line 100 colored stones up and you go, wow, that one's red, and that one's green, and that one's orange, and my fiance I know loves purple, so let's look at purple ones. It's really a more personal way, instead of a socially imposed way of thinking about both engagement and gift and what makes somebody happy. So anyway, I probably flew through this talk, but I'll just add one more little bit because Edward mentioned it, and we work very hard to look at the whole supply chain. That has become very important to our customers. I talked a little bit about cutting and what we do there, but we also, when we have the opportunity, the earlier speaker, talked about microfunding for small mines to help them get going. We better be doing that because, number one, these small miners, they don't have any money. They can't come up with $10,000 to start. If we work with them now to help them get started, we really partner with them. We can tell their story better, they can tell ours better. They can meet our needs better, just as we can meet their needs better. Then when you do that, you don't want to look just at the mine. You want to look at the whole community that surrounds it. How are you supporting that community? Because at some time that mine will run out. Is there something more that you can do? We have microfinance we can do for somebody who wants to start a chicken What else can you do in that community to look at benefiting the whole supply chain? And so we have built water wells, we built schools, hospital. We set up a nursery for replanting trees in Malawi, which used to be 85% forested, now it's 17% forested. Just think about little, small, whatever you can do, make that part of your story, because younger consumers are going to ask. My PowerPoint that I got started and didn't get finished, the first slide was 2 pictures of Time magazine. In 1999, it was Jeff Bezos on the front of that magazine. In 2019, it's Greta Thunberg. One guy's 50 years old, one girl's 16 years old. What's that message saying? That's the sort of change that's happening in our industry in colored stones. And we really need to look at that and understand it, because it's that dramatic of a change. So we still have the traditional market, what I call the traditional market. But the new market we really have to look at very differently. And it's, if we're not talking about environment, if we're not talking about social responsibility, our gemstones aren't as valuable to these younger buyers. That is what adds the emotional value to them, and as well as the beauty that comes with gemstones. So, and I know one question I'm going to get, or one comment is, yeah, ethical sourcing. What's with that ethical sourcing? I don't like that term. There's lots of ethical people in our industry, and there have been forever, and they're really great people. The sourcing I'm talking about is supportive, traceable, responsible sourcing by choice. You made a decision to run your company a little bit differently. That's really what I'm speaking of. And it is a different way of looking at things. And it is harder in some ways, because so much of our industry doesn't run that way. And you go to Thailand and you say, oh, I want this and this and this. And are they tracing where the stones are from? Do they know it was in an oven that never had beryllium in that oven if it's heat treated? Because if you ever had beryllium in there, everything's heat treated from then on out, because beryllium is absorbed into the walls of that oven. So unless you rebuild the entire oven, everything is beryllium diffused after that. You have to be asking those questions, because those in today's world are important questions. So that's my little short talk there. If there's questions, I'd love to answer them.
Where do you see the biggest challenge in what you're doing now? Because you're talking about a multitude of different stones, quality, grades, cut sizes. Where's your biggest challenge?
You're right. We cut 150 different kinds of gemstones. What's our biggest challenge? Our biggest challenge is really to keep track of everything we're doing, and to remind my staff, when we're working with a new supplier, they need to fill out our questionnaire on how they're producing. Doesn't mean they couldn't make up something, but we find most of them really are supportive of this sort of direction if they can do it. So we want the photos to support it. We want the legal export documents. All of these need to go in a file so we can support what we're saying. And sometimes you get really busy and they end up on the end of a desk and somebody cleans the office on Friday and they all go in the round file. It's really just keeping track of all that. We are having some suppliers, some miners, that are actually changing, altering, or maybe expanding the way they produce. They're thinking of it in a more expansive process. And so some of them now actually come to us with that information ahead of time. That makes our job a lot easier. They're already saying, partly from government regulations, Edward talked about pretty strong rehabilitation laws in Brazil, that you can't just leave a big bunch of holes and, scorched earth sort of thing. That sort of information is really important. So some countries it's easier to work in. Australia has very strong environmental laws. The United States, not that they're always enforced, but at least we know they're there. Brazil. Others have nothing, and we have to work with the mines to actually help them understand and pay for. We need to pay extra if we're going to ask them to go rehabilitate that afterwards when there's no money, when they're not selling anything to do so. So it's really just keeping track of all of it is a lot of what I would say. And understanding what 22-year-olds want when you're my age. So that's a bit of a challenge too.
Eric, would you say that that for the new market, that one of the biggest rule changes is that what was considered included and included and not heated and not, but maybe less valuable earlier, is raising in value and becoming considered authentic?
Yes, and things that we, again, the earlier speakers alluded to this also, certain colors that made a certain mine uneconomical. Sapphire, we'll talk about that. One of the mines we work with, 18% of this material that comes out after heating is blue. The rest is celery and, I don't know, every other color you can think of. That mine was never profitable until the last few years because now all those colors they speak personally to individual people, and we get calls for, we want really pale celery green. We want something that we want a bicolored sapphire. We want a bicolored sapphire that is orange and blue, which is really hard. But, clear down to very specific things. And you say, how are we going to do this in a volume level? Well, I'm not sure. I think that roadmap is going to develop as we work more in this area. But you're absolutely right. We would never cut sapphires with inclusions before. And now we cut some I can barely see through. And because we specifically have asked by a manufacturer that's doing a reproduction line to cut that quality of sapphire.
Any other questions? All right, let's give Eric a round of applause.
Thank you.